You're listening to Kitchen Table Finance. Join Dave Shotwell and Nick Nauta as they cut through the complexity of financial planning and serve bites of investment advice that are both personal and practical.
Hey Dave, how you doing today?
I am doing great, Nick. How are you?
Doing very well, thank you, sir. Another podcast day is upon us.
Yeah.
Excited about that. Beautiful day outside, and somebody's got a big birthday tomorrow. So I won't say how much, but
Well, it's not me, and so by process of elimination, I think our listeners can probably figure it out. But
that's right.
You know what? Take the day off tomorrow, Nick.
I will absolutely do that, and Monday too. How's
Good.
that?
That sounds like a plan. You know what? Just in your honor and in the honor of all working people everywhere, I'm going to take Monday off as well.
Perfect.
All right.
I love it. So we have an interesting topic today, Dave, coming from an article that we read a couple of weeks ago. Or maybe this week. I don't know. I'm getting old. I'm forgetting things.
It was over the weekend. I absolutely love it when folks that I consider like the good financial press and with larger, well-established organizations say the things that if I was in their position, they're the things I'd want to say to and the things I'd like to talk about. So I thought this was pretty cool. This is from Christine Benz. She's the personal finance writer for Morningstar's website, and great, So,
and she actually, I think, co-hosts a podcast as well with Morningstar. So I don't remember, Dave. I know we did that list once upon a time, and I don't think she was on it, but I think she should be.
She was on there for blogs that I read. But I don't think I have not listened to her podcast. I have too many podcasts in rotation right now. So
I hear you there.
I haven't listened to her. So anyway, her article last weekend was talking about what she calls her too hard pile.
That's right. So it's kind of something that she stole from a couple of gentlemen that we're big fans of, right? Mr. Munger and Mr. Buffett.
Yeah. Good old Charlie Munger, my favorite fellow Michigan attendee. I don't think he actually graduated, but he and Warren Buffett are buddies, and they are they're kind of like people climb the mountain to listen to them speak about their investments and for good reasons.
Yeah.
And so she borrowed this idea from him, and she quotes him as saying, or him and Warren Buffett talking about having 3 boxes, like inboxes, an inbox, an outbox, and a too hard pile for investment ideas.
Yeah.
And they go on to say you don't have to do everything well, right? At the Olympics, if you run the 100 meters well, you don't have to do the shot put, Warren Buffett said when he was talking about this idea. And what he was getting at, out of context, it just sounds like an old guy talking. But what he was getting at in the conversation was that when people, they get new investment ideas all the time, and they just basically sort them out right away into the good ones, the ones they understand and like, the ones they understand and don't like, and the ones that just are not things they want to waste their time trying to figure out because they're too complicated. They're not right for them.
I find that super intriguing because, I think of those two guys and I just assume that they don't they understand all investments, right? If anybody doesn't need a too hard pile, I would think it would be
Warren and Charlie, right. So they, they basically, if something's too hard to wrap their very sage brains around right away, they just move it into the too hard pile and say next. There's always a better idea that they can understand and move forward with.
Yep. Which served them well, right? I remember, famously in the 90s, late 90s, when the tech boom was going on, and Warren just wasn't comfortable with a lot of websites and companies that were coming up, and just kind of put it in the too hard pile, and served him really well. Turned out,
right. Yeah, he looked like he was getting left in the dust there for a little while in 1998, 1999, but by 2001 he looked pretty darn smart. So anyway, Christine Benz takes this idea and rather than just applying it to complicated investments, although that is part of what she has to say, she applies it to just like personal finance in general and how she approaches her own portfolio and her own decision making. And part of what I like about Christine is here she is in this position where I'm sure she's very, very smart and has all these resources at her hands, but she's very honest about her own approaches and mistakes over time. So in her too hard pile, she includes individual stocks because all of the analysis you have to do, setting aside for a minute all the research we've seen and talked about before about how buying individual stocks just adds risk to the portfolio, not necessarily any return. But she just looks at it and says, you know what? I don't want to spend all my time going over somebody's quarterly earnings estimates to understand them.
Yeah. Which I thought was, super honest and for somebody from Morningstar who's like in the business, it makes sense. But
right.
That's a full-time job. And, she's just not willing to, like most people, invest the time into it to understanding it. And so therefore it kind of goes into the too hard pile.
Yeah. And then, building on that, she also includes analyzing actively managed mutual funds for her portfolio. And for somebody from Morningstar, like I'd be afraid of the boss coming down and knocking on my door if I was to say that at Morningstar. Right. That's kind of their bread and butter is analyzing active mutual funds. But she's basically like, you know what? I don't want to spend my time figuring out alpha betas and, correlations. And all I know is that index funds get the job done and I don't have to spend as much time analyzing them. She built on that. She had a little sub comment on that. She does hold some actively managed mutual funds from Vanguard, which Vanguard's known for their index funds, but they do have a few actively managed funds as well. Because she basically has learned over time that they do a good job and she doesn't have to do a lot of work if she sticks with those particular funds. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that either, right? She decided like what level of analysis she wanted to be responsible for and is comfortable delegating the rest of it.
Right.
So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, when you think of the world of mutual funds, if you were actually going to analyze, there's just so many funds and so many different strategies. And again, like the individual stocks, it's become like a full-time job to go out and try to do that on your own.
Yeah. So, and she talked about leveraged investments and how that just complicates things. And she said, she had a comment in there that reminded me of Morgan Housel, who we've talked about before too, where she basically said, I understand that if I used leverage in my portfolio or borrowed against my investments, I may do better on paper, but I'm never going to get over how good it feels to not have that debt.
Right.
And so it's just not worth the effort that it would take to do the analysis for me because I know it's always going to bother me. I love it.
Yeah. Absolutely. So the last one that she had mentioned was market timing, and she kind of framed it in the world of rebalancing. But I kind of took it to be more of having an annual rebalance is one thing. Trying to figure out the exact right time to rebalance your portfolio leans more towards market timing and trying to get that right. And trying to predict that.
Right. Well, and she talked about her friend who works with an advisor like us who talks about some of the value that they deliver is rebalancing. Well, I think that's true. As a risk management tool, it's a good approach. Would I recommend that an individual investor get too caught up in rebalancing? Probably not, because it's going to overcomplicate things, and then then it's more likely to lead to no action than the right actions. We've got really fancy, expensive software to do it.
Right.
So, it doesn't go in my too hard pile because we've got the right machinery in place, but that's different than if I was on my own, and rebalancing and the ins and outs and the pros and cons and all the research behind it would take a whole nother podcast. But I thought that was pretty interesting that she just basically she does rebalance occasionally, but not religiously like you might expect.
Right. Yep. So on the flip side of the coin, so that was kind of her investing too hard pile, but she also wrote another article, and we'll throw these in the show notes as well if people are interested. But she wrote one on her too hard pile for financial information.
Yeah, I love this because I've often thought that by and large, most individual investors that we talk to focus on the wrong stuff.
Yeah. 100%. When I read this article, I thought of you because it's like a lot of the stuff that she was saying is the same things that you say to clients all the time.
Yeah, like just turn that off, ignore that. That's not going to change your life. It's not.
Right.
That's not the important thing taking up room in your brain.
Yeah, exactly.
So individual economic data points, like knowing exactly what the CPI numbers are and what the expectations are. You could crowd out every other fun, important thing in your brain trying to keep track of what's going on in the American economy, let alone the global economy.
Absolutely. And kind of her point was they're really kind of useless unless you like use them in a group and start like looking at long-term average trends, but just one individual economic data point, which is interesting because with inflation being so prevalent, it seems like everybody's holding their breath every time the new CPI number comes out or the new labor number, and it's like it's 1 point in a long set of data points, right?
Well, we talk about like what does it mean to you, and any one of those numbers or all of them collectively, either way you want to look at it, if you subscribe to the idea that the market is largely efficient, meaning the market has already reacted to the CPI news by the time I read the number, even if I'm right there at 8:30 on the third Wednesday every morning ready for it,
right?
What difference does it make? It's just it might explain what happened, but it doesn't tell me what's going to happen next. So, the bigger picture is you've got to make those decisions beforehand. And really it all boils down to, do you take risk or do you not take risk? And how much risk do you take? Because if you're going to try to guess what the inflation number is going to be next week when it comes out and how your stock's going to react to that, you're going to drive yourself crazy.
Absolutely. Yep. So her next bullet point here, Dave, was short-term market forecast. And this is kind of funny because we have our prediction podcast every year, and we've looked at like these 1 year numbers as in kind of in jest.
I'm really looking forward to January this year. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a bloodbath.
But it's just so true because, none of these people really know what's going to happen. And it's kind of like a fun exercise. They all put them out, but it's really at the end of the day, it's pretty useless, right?
Yep.
And then the next one that she had, it kind of in the same vein is short-term market news, right? Like what's happening with the market today. And she actually went on and said that, she very rarely checks, what's happened day over day in the market, right? Like she doesn't know where the Dow or where the S&P 500 ended every day. Occasionally she'll go in and see how things are doing year to date, but probably less often than what most people probably think or are actively doing, right?
So about once a week, a client says something to me along the lines of, "Well, I'm sure you watched MSNBC last night and saw this," and I'm on, no, I haven't watched MSNBC. I don't pay attention. I don't care what Jim Cramer's doing. I don't care what Squawk Box had to say.
Right.
But as a side note, I'm on the road right now, hotel rooms last night, and so I watched a little bit of MSNBC, about 25 minutes of it. And I was ready to throw my pillow at the TV, and I turned it back off and reminded myself why I don't pay attention to the financial pornography. So anyway,
Kind of surprised you made it 25 minutes, to be honest.
It was more out of like curiosity. It's like when you're watching a horror movie,
right?
And you're not really nobody's really enjoying it, right? But you got to see what's going to happen next. What are they going to say? Where's this going to lead? Anyway. And individual stock news and tips falls into the same category, right? Do you have time to research every little thing that your neighbor tells you about, like what's going to happen with GM stock when the new Corvette comes out?
Right.
Yeah.
What's the next, hot stock? Like, what's your hot
Right.
stock tip? And, I'm
Right.
sure,
Right.
like myself, you get a lot of those questions.
Oh
Like,
yeah. 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 Should we be buying AI stocks right now? That's been
right.
the hottest
Yeah.
thing. 2 years ago, it was which marijuana stock should we be buying?
Yeah.
I mean, and at the end of the day, the market's going to sort all that out, and
Right. Yep.
um, it will be what it will be.
Absolutely. It's so true. And one thing that I would kind of add to this as well is checking your own financial information, right? Like,
Hmm.
it's one thing to check the market. It's another thing to like check your portfolio balance every day. Like, that's a recipe to drive yourself crazy.
Right. Right.
Like, I check my clients' values a lot more
Yeah.
often than my own. I maybe go into my own accounts
Yeah.
once a year, maybe. And
Yeah.
then, but clients obviously we're checking more regularly, but it's just one of the, like, you can't control it. It's not going to help you to know what's happening.
Hmm.
So, kind of try to limit yourself in terms of your own portfolio news, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Or I just had another podcast idea, but we'll come back to that later. Yeah.
Love it.
So in the world of personal finance, right? There's some things that just belong on the too hard pile. If you can't explain to me how your investment strategy works in like 3 bullet points,
Mm-hmm.
you need to move on. And I used to play this hasn't happened in a while, but it used to be fairly common for somebody to come in and say, well, I was talking to so and so at such and such life insurance company, and here's this strategy where we're going to use life insurance to accomplish all these things. And I would basically, and I kind of knew where it was going to go, but I would be like, okay, explain it to me. Well, I can't really, I don't
Right.
understand all the details. Well, okay, then, maybe that should go on your too hard pile.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, in life insurance in general, 'cause permanent life insurance has gotten so much more complex these
Hmm.
last, 10, 15 years. Like, a term policy, everybody can explain a term policy.
Right.
A whole
Right.
life policy, probably most people can explain. But once you start getting into universal life and variable, and like,
Right.
those things are super complex.
Right.
And usually they're more complex than what they're worth in terms of, and I'm not saying that in general, there's certain ways that those products make sense, but
Hmm.
it's a much smaller percentage than people probably want to believe, right? And
Right.
I would never sign up for a complex life insurance policy unless I completely understood exactly how it worked and also what it's going to do for me, which is
Yeah.
probably why I'll never have a permanent life insurance policy as a part of my overall plan, right?
Right. 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 And yeah, well, I like to think maybe we're kind of like Charlie and Warren in that sense. We know enough just to not even give that stuff
Right.
the airing that other people might. Our inboxes get bombed daily with complex investment strategies. Somebody's got a new leverage double protection.
Oh yeah.
What if your clients want all the upside of the market with none of the risk, right? And it just
Yeah.
doesn't. It just isn't going to work.
Right. Yep. And so, in that same vein, along with those investment strategies, annuities can also get super
Mm-hmm.
complex, right? Like,
Yep.
there's a big difference between buying an immediate annuity, which is pretty plain vanilla. You set
Mm-hmm.
it, you give a chunk of money to the insurance company, they give you a monthly payment for as long as you're
Yeah.
alive,
Yeah.
versus the index and the variable policies
Right.
that have lifetime income riders, and that stuff just kind of
Well,
adds on the complexity.
every one of those complexities that is added, and this is the same with life insurance, which life insurance and annuities are basically insurance contracts that are the opposite of each other, that
Hmm.
are meant to solve opposite problems. But every one of those complex things that gets layered onto an annuity or a life insurance policy is basically just the insurance company trying to solve for some objection to the basics.
Right. Yeah.
And at the end of the day, if you don't need the basics that underlie the premise of an annuity or a life insurance policy, you don't need the complicated version that's just meant to like obscure the facts and make it more palatable to you.
Right. Well, because essentially what the insurance company is doing is they're taking your money and investing it, and then building in their profit and then giving you what's left over. So it's never going to be better than you just going out and investing it similarly yourself, right?
Right. And and that's not to say there's not a role for insurance or a role for annuities. It's just that the layers of complexity that obscure the facts really. That's all they're doing. You're usually going to be better off with either a term life policy or an immediate annuity if what you need is guaranteed income or a death benefit.
Right.
Yeah. Everything else is window dressing.
Absolutely.
Anyway.
Another one. we'll get off that topic because we can go on for a while. Although we do have on our list of future podcasts to talk in depth about annuities. So if that's something our listeners are interested in, that one will be coming out here in the near future. So I threw this one on the list as well as in terms of personal finance, Dave, and that's just some of these certain estate planning strategies can get very complicated. And I'm not saying that they don't have a role. But again, going back to like, what are your ultimate goals, right? Like if you've got 2 kids and you just want all your money to go to your kids, you probably don't need a complex estate plan in order to accomplish that, right?
Right. And we're not saying, don't go to an attorney and make sure you've got things set up the way that you want. But sometimes really what you need can be accomplished with beneficiary forms and, in terms of how your assets flow after you pass away. And
And a good estate planning attorney will tell you exactly that, right? They'll tell you what the pros and cons are and why you might be okay with just a will and beneficiaries versus, hey, if you're trying to do this, you really need a trust. But also there's some very complex trusts and, we can ratchet up the complexity real easily. So, if you're in a meeting with an estate planning attorney and they're automatically trying to sell you a complex trust that you don't understand, get a second opinion, please. Right?
Yes. And, there's a lot of information. I had someone the other day ask me about charitable remainder trusts. And it was it was like, why are we even having this conversation?
Yeah.
Because there was just no way. And I mean, I guess, and it's not fair. I mean, I knew there was no reason for us to even consider that for this particular case, but the client didn't. And so, but all that information was out there and she had pulled a bunch of research thinking maybe this was something she wanted to do. And it was like, no, you can do the things you're trying to do without, in your situation, going through all these complex hoops.
Right. And adding that complexity to the situation for sure.
Yeah.
So another thing I threw down on the personal finance too hard pile is I like to call them the all or none tax strategies, right? Like there's books out there that tell you, hey, you should move everything to Roth IRAs and life insurance because the government's going to come in and they're going to, basically eat away your entire savings with taxes because you're in a pre-tax, IRA, and that's just not necessarily the case. And it adds complexity, but also it doesn't make a whole lot of sense in terms of like how the real world actually works, right? And also we're making a decision based on the current tax law, and I will guarantee you that the tax law will not be the same for the remainder of time, right?
Right. Yeah. That's always been a pet peeve of mine. And we used to get that from like wholesalers.
Yeah.
Oh, you should be like implying that we should be moving all of our clients' IRA money to Roth IRAs all the time. Yeah. And it's like all the money, all the time, all the taxes, just like diversifying how we invest our clients' money. a lot of times we have to diversify the risks of different tax scenarios for them because we don't know what the future is going to hold. I
Right.
love it, but I love it when my 80-year-olds have some money in Roth and some money in after-tax accounts and some money in traditional IRAs, because then we know whatever comes, we've got some levers we can pull.
Yeah.
So if they had all Roth, well, that, yeah, you're right. We never have to think about taxes during retirement, but boy, those accounts probably could be bigger depending on what, how much
Right.
tax you paid when you created the Roth.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot to it. I guess job security, right? We shouldn't complain, but,
Yeah. Right.
yeah, people come in with that idea that it's all or nothing,
Right.
and it's never that
Yep,
that easy.
indeed. So the last thing that I wrote down as a too hard is I put college planning because we see a lot of it in terms of, or actually it looks like you wrote this one down, just
I
in terms
added,
of
yeah,
okay.
yeah. You had put college planning, and I think I put what I think is where you're going next with the clarifying comment here.
Yeah, so trying to qualify for aid through what's
Yeah,
called the FAFSA, the free
yeah,
application for federal student aid,
yeah,
trying to qualify for grants. And so a big driver of that is obviously income and assets. And so we see a
yeah.
lot of crazy strategies to well, and the reason is, the less money you have, the more money that you potentially get for
Right,
college for your kids, right?
right,
So you're trying to make yourself look poor, and that usually is never a good way to go about. Like, it's not a good financial strategy to try to do that so that you can have a little bit more college
right,
grant money, right?
right. And yeah, folks jump through all these complicated hoops, and it rarely helps them.
Right.
That's the part that they miss when their kid's a freshman or a sophomore in high school, is you're basically going to make yourself poor on paper, when what the federal loan or federal aid structure is all about is driven by parents' income for the most part.
Right. Yeah, the biggest
So
portion.
so yes, it makes a difference, but it doesn't usually get you out. It doesn't make the difference between not having to pay for college, and then you've got to find a way to get access to that money that you locked up in a complicated strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And we didn't touch on it, but also, we see that a lot in Medicaid planning as well,
Yes.
right? Like,
Yeah.
hey, I got to
Yeah.
give this money away because if I need to go into
Yes.
the nursing home, well, then they're going to, take it, they're going to make me spend it on my care.
Yeah.
Usually the words are, the government's going to take it from me, which is not
Right.
necessarily care. You have to
They're
spend it
going to
on your care
spend it on your
first.
care. Right.
So we see all these crazy gifting strategies, and it's just
Yes.
like, if you would have taken that money and used it to increase your health,
Yeah.
you probably would have been better off. Instead,
Yeah.
you make yourself look poor, and you end up doing
Being
the
poor.
thing that you wanted
Yeah.
to avoid,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Live like a pauper to avoid being a pauper.
Yeah, right.
Um, yeah. Well, anyway, yeah. So circling back, if it's a complicated strategy that you can't explain very easily or seems too good to be true, it probably just belongs in the too hard pile.
Yeah, and I guess the best advice that I would give clients, or not clients, and people out there, is, if you're not, don't be afraid to tell whoever it is that you're working with that you don't understand it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And don't be afraid to not do something because you don't understand it. What we see a lot of times is people get into these situations because somebody that they perceived as smarter than them or knew what they were doing sold them something that they didn't
Mm-hmm.
really understand, only to come to find out a couple years later that that person probably didn't understand it either, and
Mm-hmm.
B, it really wasn't the right move for them, but they did it just because they felt like they didn't,
Right.
they weren't smart enough, or whoever it was that was selling it to them knew what they were doing, right?
Right. For
See a
sure.
lot of people get in trouble that way. So don't be afraid to ask questions, say you don't understand it, get a second opinion, or just walk away from something because you don't understand it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Well, all right, Dave. If our listeners have anything that they would add that's in their too hard pile, we would love to hear it. Shoot us an email at info@srbadvisors.com. We'll put these articles in the show notes and look for our upcoming annuity podcast here in the near future, right?
Okay. Sounds good, Nick.
Thanks, Dave.
Take care.
This is a Zedia Media production.